What's up, everyone? A wild conspiracy theory is making the rounds right now, claiming that Drake allegedly used his wealth, influence, and connections to help push an indictment against YG. The whole conversation started with Glasses Malone, a West Coast podcaster who first made his name as a rapper and has long-standing ties to Kendrick Lamar. He's deeply connected to West Coast hip-hop culture, so it's important to understand the perspective he's coming from before diving into what he had to say.
He can spend that money for YG life. He can spend that money for YG life. Let me tell you what his Mark doing. He's spending money and financing Draco campaign to try to this boy life and get him arrested because he mad about a battle. He started playing me like that because I swear to God, that little shit get shot up and all that. I make his life horrible. All that shit he living in out here, cuz that shit get burnt up. See, the difference is, cuz, it's like real power. See, that's rented power. You rent it, you pay for it. Real power, cuz, is when it's actually real. When niggas will do it for you just for the measure.
That part.
You don't want me to start kicking cuz back in. You don't want me to start announcing to the world exactly what type of you doing. See, Harry, y'all be fans of cuz, and y'all want me to go. I'm not really tripping about, it's not an important topic, cuz. You wanted to do it. This ain't no conspiracy, this is a fact.
So this whole situation was incredibly strange. To understand why people started talking about it, you have to go back to the murder of LA rapper Draco the Ruler, which happened several years ago and remains unsolved. Poetic Flacco from No Jumper was the first person to publicly claim this is the exact individual who killed Draco the Ruler. Then there was Munchie B, who has appeared on No Jumper and is allegedly close to that same person. At one point, he even said, "I'll pass the bottle to Draco the Ruler's killer," making it clear that he knew him. So Flacco identified the man, and Munchie B openly acknowledged being familiar with him. Later, both YG and No Jumper became part of the conversation. Adam22 explained that the California Highway Patrol showed up at No Jumper looking to speak with Munchie B and questioned him about the case, since Draco's murder is still unsolved. Not long after that, officers also approached YG, detaining him before his scheduled Versus-style performance with the game later that night. That alone raised plenty of eyebrows. Afterward, YG reposted the clip with the caption, "Say it ain't so," followed by another post that read, "Red alert, B-Team tap in." B-Team refers to a blood-affiliated group, and I don't want to dive too deeply into gang politics, but that context matters before getting into the next part of this story. The theory being pushed, at least according to some people, wasn't coming from Glasses Malone alone. Karen Civil, who has close ties to YG, also amplified it by saying people needed to turn this up in a post that was later deleted, even though it was originally published. Karen Civil has been around the music industry for years, has worked closely with YG, and while there are people on Drake's team who handle similar sensitive situations behind the scenes, I wouldn't say she and Drake are personally at odds. Most major artists have people who manage sensitive situations behind the scenes. For example, people have pointed to incidents involving Cardi B and Lil Uzi Vert, questioning how certain controversies seem to disappear from the headlines. There were allegations involving Uzi and his former girlfriend Britney Bird that eventually faded from public discussion, and people often make similar observations about Cardi B whenever legal or public issues seem to lose momentum. Drake, on the other hand, hasn't really had many situations like that become public, which some people argue either means his team is exceptionally effective or that those situations never existed in the first place. Karen Civil has built a career around digital marketing and industry relationships, but she's also faced criticism over the years. Some people have accused her of taking advantage of clients or failing to deliver what they paid for, while others argue that expectations simply weren't met and she became an easy target for blame. Because of that, I'm not going to completely dismiss her credibility, but she is undeniably someone with real influence inside the industry. So when she helped amplify this theory, it naturally made more people pay attention. Then Adam22 said he personally spoke with Drake and asked him about the situation, and that's the part that really had me scratching my head.
Back and forth, and we don't need to rehash that. But it occurred to me like, man, that's so weird that Drake gave Draco a verse seemingly out of nowhere, and they hung out at the club one time, a couple little things like that. That's kind of crazy, right? So I asked Drake about that. I said, when you reached out and worked with Draco, was it partially to throw shade at YG. He said, absolutely not. He said that Oliver put him on to Draco and that he didn't even know about Draco and YG having issues until later on, i.e. like when Draco was already gone. Which, I'm not gonna lie, I knew there was like venom being thrown back and forth, but I just like, I wasn't tapped in enough to know that this was gonna go in this direction, that it was this serious, you know? I didn't know that we're gonna kill him. Anyway, that's just a tidbit that Drake made clear, is that him co-signing Draco was not a great way to get at YG. Now, what I didn't ask him, and I actually thought about it afterwards, and I was like, damn, I should have asked this as a follow-up question, but it would have been kind of weird because it was like hours later. But what I should have said was, did YG say anything? Now, the answer to that question, I might not be bringing to the table because I wouldn't want to share like a private conversation that I didn't have authorization to. But that would have been the logical next question. Did it piss off YG? Did YG feel a way about it? Because, like, let's be real. If Drake and YG are even kind of good friends, Drake doing a song with Draco is crazy. Like, what? You did a song with my biggest op? Who?
So the song being discussed is the collaboration Drake did with Drakeo the Ruler after Drakeo was released from jail while fighting a murder case. The track was called Talk to Me. I don't believe it became a major chart hit, but it still performed well, sitting at around 113 million streams today, making it Drakeo's biggest song. Keep in mind, this was in 2021. Drakeo the Ruler's popularity exploded even more after his death. He was already a major name throughout Los Angeles, and if you're making serious noise in LA and across California, you're already succeeding in one of the biggest music markets anywhere. That's why the feature felt unusual. As we've already established, Drakeo the Ruler had ongoing issues with YG. Because of that, some people have started claiming that YG was personally involved in the stabbing that killed Drakeo. That's the allegation being made. Now, do I believe YG literally pulled out a knife and joined the crowd to stab Drakeo? Personally, no. I don't want to believe YG would be reckless enough to do something like that. What I will say, though, is that Drake acting completely unaware when speaking to Adam22 doesn't really convince me. If these allegations are what people believe, then we already know Drake and YG aren't exactly aligned today. We just don't know when that relationship started falling apart. Maybe it happened during the Kendrick Lamar feud, since YG appeared to side more with Kendrick, unlike The Game, who we'll get to in a moment because he's an important part of the overall context. The Game didn't appear at Kendrick's pop-out concert, didn't publicly rally behind Kendrick, and instead stayed neutral while maintaining his relationship with Drake. If that's true, then whatever tension existed between Drake and YG would have had to begin before 2021 for Drake to intentionally jump on a Drakeo record. That's why I have a hard time buying the explanation that Oliver simply showed Drake the music and he decided to feature without knowing anything else. No, I don't really believe that. Drake has always been one of the most informed artists when it comes to what's happening across hip-hop. We're talking about someone who was already playing Kodak Black's music back in 2014 when Project Baby dropped. Around the same time, many fans were only beginning to discover him. Even as a kid, spending hours searching for every promising new artist in the country, Drake somehow seemed even more plugged in than that. So are we really supposed to believe he heard Drakeo's music, never looked into who he was, never researched his movement, and simply jumped on the record? Especially considering Drakeo had just been released from jail. Obviously, there was a reason he had been incarcerated. Drake isn't careless when it comes to those kinds of decisions. That's why I think he wasn't being completely truthful with Adam22. Keep in mind, there was another situation where Drake's comments didn't line up with what later came out. Chris Blake Griffith, the man who publicly accused NFL player Stephon Diggs of misconduct and later reached a legal settlement, previously had direct conversations with Drake. Academics contacted Drake about him, and Drake reportedly responded by saying he didn't know the guy and had never spoken with him. Later, Chris Blake Griffith released direct messages showing that he actually had communicated with Drake. Academics then explained to his audience that he wasn't intentionally misleading anyone because he had simply repeated what Drake told him. If Drake was willing to deny that situation, then it's reasonable to believe he could also choose not to be fully transparent with Adam22, especially on a topic carrying much higher stakes. Looking at those messages, Chris Blake Griffith even asked Drake why he had unfollowed him and requested feedback on a mixtape he released. Drake responded by saying, "You're asking me to post a tape about you ratting on people? I don't come from a family, friend group, or city where that's acceptable." He went on to explain that he lives by a certain code, wasn't telling Griffith how to live his life, but felt uncomfortable supporting something connected to those allegations. I think those messages matter because they show Drake refusing to publicly amplify something he believed involved informing on other people. He wasn't the one making the accusations, but he still didn't want to co-sign that narrative. Based on that, it would seem consistent that he also wouldn't want to publicly push allegations against YG, even if the two of them currently have issues. Do I think if Drake ever found himself facing serious criminal charges, he would protect himself? That's a separate conversation. But do I think he voluntarily tries to help other people get locked up, or goes looking for opportunities to push criminal allegations? Personally, no. I don't think that's something he typically does, and those messages support that opinion. What I do think is possible is that people surrounding the online hip-hop conversation could amplify these theories on their own. Pages connected to the Drake fan community, including outlets like Academics TV, have relationships with many people in that space. I could absolutely see someone pushing this storyline simply because they feel YG turned against Drake, not because Drake instructed anyone to do it. Nobody necessarily has to be paid for something like that to spread. To me, that's a much more believable explanation. I don't think Drake himself is secretly coordinating this narrative. If YG truly believed Drake was behind everything, I also think someone would have contacted Drake as soon as he announced the Drake-Yo collaboration, because that feature was teased publicly before it officially dropped. Drake-Yo himself spoke about it, and everyone already knew about his problems with YG. So all of that was happening while Drake decided to participate. Because of that, I do believe the collaboration was, at least indirectly, a shot towards YG. The only other explanation would be complete ignorance, and I simply don't buy that. Drake was at the absolute peak of his career in 2021, coming off records like Tuesday Slide and Life is Good. He was one of the biggest artists in the world. Whenever Drake jumps on a song with someone outside the mainstream, it's usually because he understands their movement and intentionally wants to connect with it. He generally stays away from unnecessary politics, just like we saw in the Chris Blake Griffith situation. That's why I believe the feature carried a message. This also brings us back to The Game and YG. The Game has consistently shown loyalty to Drake over the years, yet here he is appearing alongside YG, while YG is publicly signaling that he has serious issues with Drake. And these aren't ordinary industry disagreements. If the allegations people are discussing are even remotely true, we're talking about investigations, deaths, and the possibility of lengthy prison sentences. This is much more serious than a typical rap feud. Families have been affected, lives have been lost, and the level of hostility being discussed goes far beyond rap discs. So when The Game continues working with YG while remaining friendly with Drake, I don't automatically see that as betrayal. Instead, it tells me there are pieces of this story the public still don't know. Maybe it's simply business. Maybe conversations happened privately between everyone involved. But when YG reposted Glasses Malone's comments, it felt like he was putting his stamp on that narrative and making it clear that he no longer stands with Drake, despite their long history together. They've recorded multiple songs, including at least one well-known collaboration around the Still Brazy era. So there's clearly much more happening behind the scenes than fans currently understand. I'm genuinely interested to learn more, because I think people should be asking bigger questions about the relationships between The Game, YG, and Drake. If the conflict between YG and Drake is actually real, it could be even more serious than Drake's feud with Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick unquestionably had a much larger impact on Drake's public image, but this situation, if accurate, involves allegations tied to real criminal investigations, violence, and potentially decades in prison. That's why I believe Drake wasn't completely honest with Adam22. At the same time, I don't believe Drake is secretly paying people to push the narrative that YG was responsible for Drake-Yo the Ruler's death.